I'm Corbett Wall with DV Auction, here with a cattle market summary for the week ending Friday, September the 4th, where this week was a whole lot like last week, just not nearly as sharp. And we had some losses early in the week and then found some footing there middle of the week, and then a little bit of gain and confidence returning late in the week. And that's exactly the same thing we did the previous week. It just wasn't nearly as sharp. And and I don't think these are two separate bounces here. I think this is all the same drop, and we're just getting a little bit of correction here on the cattle market. And a lot of people, and I'm kind of in agreement too, think that we could get some of this back. We're not going back to where we were in June or anything like that, but we may get several of these dollars that we've lost over the last 2 or 3 weeks back. We're going into the part of the year where the market-ready fed cattle supplies are the absolute tightest, and surely you would think these feedlots could take a little bit of advantage of that and get some market position back before we start fading going off into next spring. But you know, it was a big difference between the fat cattle trade up in the north and down south. The northern feedlot areas have a lot more market-ready cattle. They've got a lot of heavy cattle left on there, and the southern plains don't have a lot of cattle on the show list right now, and so they can demand more money for cattle, although it's hard to find anybody that sells negotiated, so you're not sure what they could get for those cattle if they were to sell them. Those packers would a whole lot rather give $1 or $2 too much, just selling over the weighted average, rather than to sell those or buy those cattle on the negotiated trade and establish a market for it there. And those commercial feedlots in the southern plains seem to be okay with it, so who are we to argue? But the northern plains, especially in Iowa, these farmer feeders are struggling with their trade. They've got heavy cattle out there. They're the least experienced in trying to sell their fed cattle, but they're the ones that are establishing the market off of all the cattle are trading off of every week. And this week, especially in Iowa, they struggled there and sold some cattle early in the week from 140 to 142, while in some of the fat cattle sale barns that they still have up in that country, there's up to 146, and you wonder why they don't all take them to the sale barn. Maybe they're getting some guys a little demand and a little trade activity on them is what they need. Dress sales are struggling there from 222 up to 223, maybe 225 out in Nebraska, but that's as much as $6 lower there. But just really a struggle there, and you wonder why they have so many cattle that are ready right now. Well, they live in a part of the country where the people that do fall calf, when they got ready to sell those this spring, a lot of them were too heavy to go to grass with. It's just kind of growthy cattle that they raise up there. And those farmer feeders and some of the commercial lots in the northern plains just put those cattle on feed, while the cattle that were the same age in the southern plains and back east were turned out on grass. So with the big gains they saw in the feedlot this summer, those cattle up in the northern plains are ready right now, and some of them starting to get some pounds on them. But they're struggling right there. The southern plains, as of yet, have not sold any fed cattle. They would probably be asking 145 plus, but they'd just as soon take $5 over the weighted average and just let the northern plains guys settle it. But your cash feeder cattle sales this week, really all week, were a little steady to a little bit stronger. A lot of overreaction last week in the cash market. A lot of people trying to buy cattle in line with the board, which is really hard to do, and they were really tough on the first of the big calves coming in. But this week kind of steady, $2 to $3 higher on feeder cattle weights, and some of the calves were, you know, $5 to $15 higher, recovering some of that 10 to 20 to 30 that they had lower last week. But CME index was actually starting to move higher there in the middle of this week too, and that takes a lot because that's a 7-day moving average. And but it's starting to get some wheels under it again and start creeping back up from the big $2 to $3 more losses they were getting every day last week. But it's between 207, 208. Look at the Cattle Market Central. It's some loads of cash sales are bigger this week. At the OKC West El Reno Livestock Market in Oklahoma there, they had really a load and a half, 96 head of steers on Wednesday, weighed 747 at 208.50. That's a real good test of the market right there in the middle part of the country. You think some big calves don't sell well? How about northern Arkansas? The northern Arkansas livestock market, Green Forest there, they had 52 head of steers sold right before noon on Wednesday. Weighed 643 at 225 and a half. Pretty good market, and imagine some pretty good cattle. They got good cattle everywhere anymore, people. Just because they're on the east side of the country don't mean that they have humps and bumps on them. There's good cattle everywhere. Coming in on Thursday, later there in the afternoon on Thursday, they had 91 steers, weighed 713, bring 230, and that's almost giving you a hint of what that market used to be. But all across that northern plains where they've got the trouble selling their fed cattle, they're also out of big yearlings too. They've moved all those cattle off grass, and they've sold all the cattle that they were backgrounding these yearlings, and they just don't have many yearlings up in northern plains and all across Nebraska and the sand hills there, and in South Dakota and going off into Iowa and places like that. They really want to get their hands on some cattle. They know they're going to have a lot of big calves to choose from here in the next 2 or 3 months, but they'd like to go ahead and start using up some of that feed they've got left over from last year's crop on some of these yearling cattle. They're going to outperform before they have to start wondering where they're going to put this year's crop, and they know it's going to be a big one, just looking on both sides of the road for morning coffee. But probably the best thing we've got going for us this week is it looks like we're going to have outstanding grilling weather across the country for Labor Day weekend. So get out there and grill a steak. Talk about doing it. It's contagious. If one guy starts grilling it and that smoke sneaks over the fence and gets into the neighbor's nose, he's going to want to grill one too. And that's really what we need, guys, is more people to eat more beef, and it'll all trickle down. But check out DV Auction on Saturday here, this holiday weekend. Broaden your horizons, look at some places you don't normally look at. How about upstate New York? JSK auction there has a complete Angus dispersal there. That's on Saturday. That's in the Finger Lakes Livestock Auction there at Canandaigua, New York. But that's pretty much it for your cattle market summary this week, and we'll talk to you next week.